The chill of dawn clung to the clustered rooftops of Hof like a damp shroud as young Frantz Schmidt walked beside the guards who had come for him. Frost glazed the cobblestones, the air held the stillness that only winter mornings possess, as though the world were holding its breath. Frantz kept his eyes lowered, not because he feared stumbling, but because he feared meeting the gaze of his neighbors. He already knew what he would see in them: pity from some, suspicion from most, and in a few, thinly veiled disgust. Not for anything he had done, but for what they said he was destined to become. He had been born into a curse, one he did not earn and could not escape. Years before his birth, his father had been falsely implicated in a crime and forced to perform an execution as punishment. Such a stain, in medieval Germany, did not wash away. The mark of an executioner was hereditary. It descended upon the family like a shadow stretching across generations. And so, even before Frantz could walk, the town whispered about the role he would one day take, one that he himself dreaded. As they approached the scaffold standing stark against the pale sky, Frantz forced himself to raise his head. The wooden structure, ominous even in silence, loomed above him with a grim authority. He felt his stomach twist. He had walked past this platform countless times as a child, always avoiding looking at it directly, always pretending it was just another piece of the town. Today, it was no longer something to avoid. Today, it was his classroom. The crowd had gathered earlier than usual. People wrapped in wool cloaks murmured among themselves, casting glances at the boy being led forward. The whispers rose like insects buzzing in tall grass. "That's the Schmidt boy, poor lad, born into blood. He'll grow cold like the rest of them." Frantz's cheeks burned. He wished he could speak, explain that he didn't want this life, that he dreamed of becoming a healer, that he had once spent hours gathering herbs and mixing tinctures with the old apothecary who humored his childish fascination. But words would change nothing. The law had chosen his path, not his desires. The master executioner stood waiting at the foot of the scaffold. A broad man with graying hair, a thick beard, and eyes that held nothing but exhaustion. Yet his movements were controlled, intentional. He watched Frantz approach with neither warmth nor hostility, only the stern acceptance of a man used to duty. When the guards stepped aside, the master executioner stopped Frantz with a raised hand. "Steady hands," he said quietly, his voice roughened by years of shouting over crowds. "Steady hands are the difference between dignity and suffering. Learn that, and you'll learn everything." Frantz nodded stiffly, though the man's solemn words unsettled him. This was the closest thing to encouragement he would hear. Training began immediately. Not with swords or ropes, but with observation. The master explained each tool and each method in matter-of-fact tones, as though teaching carpentry or tailoring. To Frantz, the explanations were surreal, half frightening, half hypnotic. The precision required, the knowledge of anatomy, the practiced motions, it was far more meticulous than he had ever imagined. Executioners were not savage brutes, as the villagers often whispered. They were technicians of finality. But no amount of technical understanding eased the weight that lay heavy in Frantz's chest. As days turned into weeks, Frantz spent long hours in the training yard behind the executioner's lodge. He practiced with wooden swords at first, then with dulled steel. His arms ached. His back throbbed. The winter wind cut through his clothing. Yet he forced himself onward, drilling motion after motion until his hands no longer shook. The master watched silently, intervening only when Frantz's form faltered. "Again," was the word he said most often. Frantz repeated strokes until his muscles felt like fire and his breath came ragged. Sometimes he paused to stare at his palms, red and blistered. He would whisper to himself, "If I must do this, I must do it right. I will not be cruel." It became a mantra that soothed him through exhaustion and fear. But his training did not end with the sword. The master insisted he study anatomy from a thick, weathered manuscript. Drawings of bones, sinews, and joints filled its yellowed pages. Though he had once studied such things out of a desire to heal, he now studied them for the opposite reason. But even here, he sought dignity in knowledge. Precision is mercy, the master reminded him again and again. Village life offered no refuge. Children who had once played with Frantz now avoided him. Mothers pulled their sons away when he passed. Merchants hesitated before accepting his coin, though they dared not refuse outright. To them, he was neither child nor criminal, but something in between, necessary, feared, tainted. One afternoon, while practicing alone, Frantz paused mid-swing as he heard soft footsteps. A girl his age lingered at the edge of the yard, clutching a basket. She looked at him with wide eyes, but not with fear, rather with curiosity. For a brief moment, Frantz thought she might speak. But when he lowered his sword, she startled and scurried away, the basket bumping against her hip. Frantz exhaled a long, quiet breath. Even kindness seemed afraid of him. Years passed in this strange half-life. His arms grew stronger. His swings grew straighter. His resolve hardened not into cruelty, but into a kind of grim professionalism. Though he still longed to heal, he accepted that his role was to deliver an ending, cleanly, swiftly, without spectacle. The day he completed his apprenticeship dawned gray and cold. The townspeople gathered once more. This time, the crowd felt different, not curious but expectant. A real executioner stood before them now, not a boy. The condemned was a thief, trembling violently as he was led to the platform. Frantz felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He approached the man quietly, speaking so only the prisoner could hear. "I will be quick. Look straight ahead." The man's frightened eyes met his. Something passed between them, fear, gratitude, resignation. Frantz held the sword with steady hands. He felt the weight of duty settle on his shoulders like an iron mantle. When the moment came, it was swift, clean, final. The murmurs from the crowd blended into a low hum, though Frantz heard none of it clearly. He only felt the immense stillness that followed, the kind that comes when fate has been carried out. That night, he returned to his small room inside the executioner's quarters. He lit a candle, dipped his quill, and opened a blank ledger. His hand did not shake as he wrote his first entry. "One man today. May God grant him peace." And thus began the life of Frantz Schmidt, apprentice no more, but a man bound to a duty he never chose, performing it with a precision that would one day make him both feared and respected, the deadliest executioner in all of medieval Germany. By the time Frantz Schmidt entered his middle years, he had become a figure whose presence could quiet an entire marketplace. His reputation had spread far beyond Nuremberg. Travelers spoke of him in taverns, magistrates praised his discipline, even criminals, when faced with judgment, sometimes asked if Schmidt himself would carry out their sentence, hoping for the clean, swift end he was known for. The man who had grown up shunned now carried a strange, heavy authority. Wherever he walked, on one biting autumn morning, he strode through the city gates with a slow, deliberate pace. His breath fogged before him in faint white clouds. The people of Nuremberg parted silently as he passed, forming a path without being asked. Children tugged at their mothers' sleeves and whispered questions, but the mothers only hushed them, casting uneasy glances at the sword wrapped in crimson cloth at Schmidt's side. He kept his eyes forward, as he always did. He had learned long ago that looking at the crowd too closely only reminded him of what he had lost: ordinary life, normal friendships, the comfort of anonymity. Yet he also understood that his duty required distance. Familiarity blurred judgment. Attachment weakened precision. And precision was the only thing keeping him from becoming like the brutes the people imagined executioners to be. The scaffold had been erected in the center of the marketplace, a wooden platform framed by ropes and posts. Merchants who would normally be shouting prices at this hour now stood silently behind their stalls, watching Schmidt approach. The atmosphere felt strangely heavy, as though even the air anticipated what was to come. Today's condemned prisoner had committed a crime that had left the entire region on edge. The people wanted justice, but what they truly wanted was spectacle, something to point to later and say, "I saw it with my own eyes." Punishments in medieval cities were as much public reassurance as they were sentencing. Schmidt, however, saw it differently. He stepped onto the platform and took a moment to inspect every inch of it. He checked the stability of the wooden planks beneath his boots, tested the angle at which he would stand, and unwrapped his sword with meticulous care. The blade caught the early sunlight in a thin, bright line. Even through layers of cloth, Schmidt handled it with reverence. To him, it was not a weapon but an instrument of necessity, one that deserved respect because of what it represented. As he wiped the blade with a clean linen cloth, he sensed the crowd shifting. The guards were arriving with the condemned. Murmurs rippled across the square like wind moving through tall grass. Schmidt straightened, the linen still folded neatly in his hand. The prisoner emerged between two guards, shackled at the wrists, pale-faced, and trembling visibly. His eyes darted left and right as though seeking escape, though he knew none existed. The weight of judgment pressed down on him with each halting step. Schmidt watched him quietly, observing the fear in the man's shaking hands and the unsteady movements of his feet. He recognized that fear, it was universal. In every condemned person he had ever met, he had seen this same look. Terror mingled with disbelief, the mind wrestling with the reality that time had run out. It was the executioner's duty to guide that final moment with calm. The guards led the prisoner to the center of the platform. The murmuring crowd grew louder, leaning forward, eager for what they believed they deserved to witness. Schmidt lifted a hand, and surprisingly, the square fell silent again. People respected him enough to obey even an unspoken command. He stepped closer to the condemned and spoke in a quiet, steady tone that carried further than one would expect. "Look ahead," he instructed. "Do not be afraid. What remains will be swift." The prisoner swallowed hard, tears forming at the corners of his eyes. "Please, please make it quick," he whispered, voice cracking. "I don't want to suffer." Schmidt nodded, and that single motion seemed to ease the man's shaking. The executioner had a strange way of calming people in their final moments, not through promises of salvation, but through the unwavering confidence of someone who had performed this grim duty hundreds of times. He positioned the man carefully, adjusting his stance so the prisoner would not falter, correcting the angle so the sentence could be carried out cleanly and without error. To the crowd, these motions looked like cold efficiency. But to Schmidt, they were acts of mercy. Small, almost invisible gestures that ensured the end would not be drawn out or clumsy. The city magistrates stood to the side, hands clasped behind their backs, watching with satisfaction. They valued Schmidt not because he was feared, but because he was reliable, an anchor of order in a time when justice was often chaotic. When everything was in place, the marketplace stilled. The sound of a distant church bell marked the hour. Schmidt's breath slowed. The prisoner squeezed his eyes shut. A long silence settled over the square. Then, with a single fluid motion, Schmidt completed the task. A clean strike, precise and practiced, executed with the solemnity of a ritual. The crowd reacted instantly, some gasped, others muttered in subdued satisfaction, a few turned away. Yet even they could not deny the efficiency. Schmidt stepped back, maintaining his steady breathing, and covered the blade once more in the crimson cloth. He whispered a small prayer under his breath, not for himself, but for the man whose life had ended. His expression did not change, though a familiar weight settled in his chest. No matter how many years passed, he never grew numb to the finality of death. As he descended the scaffold, he noticed movement near one of the wooden posts. A boy, no older than 10, was staring at him with wide, unblinking eyes. Fear, awe, confusion, all mixed together. Schmidt felt an unexpected jolt of recognition. He had once stared like that at an executioner, back when he was still dreaming of healing herbs and simple days. He walked past the boy without breaking stride, but the image stayed with him. Later that evening, in the quiet of his chamber, he recorded the events of the day in his diary. The room was lit by a single candle, shadows flickered across the parchment as he wrote in clean, deliberate strokes. Judged by the court, dispatched swiftly. May the Lord receive him. He closed the diary gently, extinguished the candle, and sat in the darkness for a long moment, listening to nothing but the faint beating of his own heart. Frantz Schmidt, the most precise executioner of his age, had ended hundreds of lives with a steady hand. Yet every one of those lives left a subtle mark inside him, as though each execution carved a small notch on his spirit. And though he never admitted it aloud, he sometimes wondered whether he was carrying out justice, or simply bearing the unbearable so others would not have to.